Welcome to the Sovereigns and Stack. Interesting.
This is Braden coming to you live from unStable Summit in Denver, Colorado.
Dun, dun, dun.
We're having a pretty fun time here. We just got done listening to Nevin present something regarding RWAs. To be honest, we did not catch most of the talk, and so I am going to be listening to the recording. But this has been pretty interesting so far to be able to meet all of the different people from the Reserve team, from the greater DeFi community, and to be able to network and establish faces with names.
This is actually pretty exciting for me because I am not native to the cryptocurrency community. I actually came from Urbit, and the Urbit community is very different than the rest of the Ethereum ecosystem. So the one time I was ever in Denver previously was for the ETH Denver about 2 years ago, and it's a very different vibe. People are much more professional, and not that it's a bad thing for Ether, but these people seem to be very serious about what they're trying to do. I don't get the impression that these are very heavily like meme coins or meme projects or trying to pump or something like that.
So welcome everybody. This is Braden again, but welcome. Nevin is taking a seat right now, and we're having a fun time here, guys. So.
Are you broadcasting this live or just recording it? Oh, nice. Oh, cool. Well, hello to whoever might be out there.
It's hard for me to hear you. You'll have to speak up.
Okay. Yeah, I just said hello to whoever might be out there.
Yeah. Hope you guys are listening. I don't have any stats for how many people are listening, but I imagine it's in the tens of thousands.
Of course.
So, Nevin, if you don't mind, just to give a little bit of a backstory, Nevin is the president of Confusion Capital.
Yep.
And so, formerly, ABC Labs and Confusion Capital, were parts of Reserve. And so, if you recognize that name, they have changed, hands just a tiny bit into separate companies. And so Nevin is the head of Confusion Capital, and ABC Labs is Asset-Backed Currency Labs, and that is Thomas is the CEO of ABC Labs. So, but Nevin, if you don't mind, kind of giving like a high level of what you talked about, and then maybe going into the weeds on that too. Everybody will enjoy it.
Cool. Yeah, happy to. So, Confusion Capital, just briefly, its primary function is to offer grants in the Reserve ecosystem. But in addition to that, in our spare time, we're looking into thinking through the future of crypto as it relates to Reserve and in general, and trying to figure out how are things going to go and how can we push things in the right direction. And so one topic that I've been focused on is this question of, will the securities market, stocks and bonds in the United States eventually transition to being tokens on public blockchains, or maybe exist in parallel as tokens on public blockchains? And you hear a lot of talk from banks and others in the financial industry, a lot of interest in tokenization, and that their motivation for that is basically to cut down on back office costs and cut down on settlement risk. And so one might think that interest in tokenization, that those experiments will eventually turn into, stocks and bonds just existing as tokens on public blockchains. Maybe, you could deposit or withdraw from your brokerage account the way you can with a crypto exchange. But as I've looked into it a little bit, I've concluded that the answer is no. That's not what's going to happen by default. And if you look closer into the projects that these banks and other institutions are building, they always end up going in the direction of a private permissioned blockchain that's just for settlement among these regulated entities. And that really makes perfect sense. Like, given the current rules, that's actually all that's really allowed. I think you, with the current rules, couldn't actually issue tokens on public blockchains to represent these assets. But also, it's not within the incentives of those organizations. They don't particularly care about freedom and programmability. They haven't caught the bug that people in crypto have of, permissionless innovation and global accessibility. That's just not what they're about. So my conclusion is no, that's not going to happen by default. And so then there's a question of, well, can we make it happen? Like, is there some way the crypto industry can bring that about, given that the existing players are unlikely to do it themselves? And I think the answer might be yes, but it's pretty complicated. And what I spoke about today, I'm sure the talk will be published online before too long, and I encourage you to check it out if you're curious about this topic. But basically, I've had a couple informal chats with folks at the SEC, and I've talked to others in the ecosystem to try to get to the bottom of the question of, like, well, what is the biggest sticking point? Like, why is it that the current regulatory apparatus is not allowing companies to tokenize U.S. securities for U.S. users? And we can tell that that's happening. We can tell that they're not being allowed to, because we're seeing permissionless tokenizations of U.S. securities offshore. Mountain Protocol with USDM out of Bermuda is one example. Swarm Markets has tokenized U.S. equities out of Germany, sort of Germany-Liechtenstein combo, Backed Finance, and there are several more. There's like too many for me to remember all the names even right now. And they're issuing tokens where the tokens are not whitelisted. They're permissionless. You can send them to anyone, including U.S. people, by the way. But they have in their terms of service that U.S. people are not supposed to touch those tokens. And their front ends are, will block you if you try to access them from a U.S. IP address. And so, those companies obviously would be trying to offer those products to U.S. people if they could. The U.S. is a large market. But they're not. So we can tell that they're not being allowed to. And then the question is, well, why are they not being allowed to? What are the fundamental things that people who are in those positions of power object to? And from my research so far and conversations, the answer that the biggest problem is KYC. The biggest concern is if we let all these things exist as tokens on public blockchains, we will lose the ability to, track the flows of money and stop crime. And so, it's an interesting question whether that's actually a legitimate problem or not. I honestly don't know the answer. Like, you could look at the actual effectiveness of the AML apparatus with Chainalysis and all of the on-chain monitoring and monitoring around the edges and so on of crypto today. We actually have, plenty of data. We have a live working example to see how well is that working. You could compare that to the effectiveness of existing, traditional financial institution AML and sort of see which one is more effective. It would be hard to compare. I actually don't know. But regardless of that underlying reality, the current perception is that we would be permitting a whole lot of criminal activity and money laundering if we were to allow all securities to exist permissionlessly on-chain for U.S. people. So basically what I'm starting to talk about publicly to try to get people to think about this together is, how do we solve that fundamental tension between the desire for KYC and the desire for permissionless transactability. And so there's a number of different avenues that people explore for this, but no solution seems satisfactory to me thus far. So basically, I'm coming to the broader ecosystem with a challenge of, can we come up with a KYC mechanism that satisfies what regulators want without making transactions restricted or permissioned in a way that stops sort of the magic of DeFi? Or alternately, can anyone come up with a way to get the regulatory apparatus on board for an approach where we don't have KYC? Maybe by doing that research and showing the effectiveness of the current AML regime that exists within crypto today. And so yeah, anyway, that's what I'm doing. And part of my talk is talking about the history of how we transition from paper certificates to digital, and there's sort of some inspirational stories there. But let me stop here in case Braden, I don't know if you have any responses or questions or interest in where to go next.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that is very interesting to figure out how to. It's kind of like a Pandora's box. Once you let it happen, you can't really close it again. And so, I think it's definitely worthy of a lot of investigation. I guess, Dashes, do you have any particular questions on what Nevin just said?
I don't know if it's exactly about what you just talked about, but I had a question specifically about the creation of Confusion Capital and these other institutions, or would you call them institutions that got formed out of the Reserve Company? But can you explain like how that decision was made to and why it was made?
There were a couple of driving reasons for creating those new companies. One very simple practical reason was that in order for RPay, which is sort of succeeded by Best Friend Finance, to get banking partnerships, it was necessary to separate different lines of business into different legal entities so that banks could choose to work with parts of that business and not other parts per their different risk appetites in order for us to achieve the structure that we wanted to go for. So that was one reason that caused us to think about, okay, maybe we should add some companies to the ecosystem. But then it's also, I think, just a very helpful division of responsibilities and functions. It's like, for instance, for a long time before the announcement of these companies, Thomas had really been leading relevant parts of the team. But simply by making it its own legal entity and having him be officially the CEO of that entity, it makes it very easy for everyone internally and externally to understand what's going on and sort of treat everyone in the right ways in terms of their just their normal coordination. So part of it is just like, we already, in fact, had started to have these structures, but by creating them as separate companies, it makes it more real and easier for everyone to understand and keep track of, and easier to make decisions and easier to operate independently, not having to coordinate, every little last system and so on. So part of it is just about, that sort of coordination aspect of it.
The biggest problem is okay, so how can you come, kind of like he was
Cool.
talking about, it has to do with change finality.
Sorry, I'm switching between like the headphones on. It's very disorienting when you have the headphones on and it reverberates your own voice back into your own ears.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think the formation of the two different companies is very very good to hear. James, indicated that ABC Labs is now focusing more. This was in the Discord community call from a couple weeks ago, talking about focusing on the deployers and TVL growth, and so.
Can you prove that something can be executed?
I will be totally honest. I'm kind of blanking right now.
One further comment I have on that is that for years it's been hard to focus on these long-term things, like this question about tokenization in the US, or the other long-term project that we're starting now is doing backtesting and thinking through hypothetical long-term R token portfolios. Those are just things that we never got around to because whatever the current priorities are would always bubble up, to the leadership of the team. And so you're just too busy to think. Like, I would literally only get to think about those things in the shower. And sometimes not even then because I was too worried about something else. So this corporate setup also has helped create an environment for me and a few folks. It's still a small minority of these relevant collaborators to kind of carve out some space and be able to think more long term about those challenges that haven't haven't really become super urgent yet, but are extremely important to the long-term mission.
So one thing that you guys mentioned a while ago, so it was the question of, okay, so our tokens, in the future they're going to be backed by all of these different diverse assets, and what if these R tokens get very large? What does it do to the prices of the underlying assets within that R token?
Right.
And so, I don't know if you're prepared to give any sort of preliminary thoughts on that, but
no, I mean I still have no new ideas on that. We've seen an interesting parallel where the ABC Labs team sometimes talks to people within DAOs about whether they'd want to use R tokens as part of their treasury. And DAOs often have rules of the 10% rule is common, where they don't want to put more than 10% of their capital into any one thing, and they don't want to hold more than 10% of the market cap of any one thing. And I could see a similar principle emerging for an R token, where it's like an R token would be governed in such a way so as to try to not hold too large a portion of any particular asset, because the more you're holding, the more you're sort of cornering the market for that asset and maybe causing weird things to happen, right? If there's a limit of try to never hold more than 5% of a particular asset, that would force diversification. If you're hitting that 5% threshold, it's like, okay, we need to find some other asset to bring into the basket. And that's at least a simple strategy to minimize that problem. But whereas you can imagine if you had bought 50% of an asset, you certainly would have driven up its price in the course of doing that. I don't know. It's obviously hard to tell exactly what the exact dynamics would be, but that would certainly be a problem at some scale. Obviously, we're very far away from that at this point, but yeah, it's exactly the sort of long-term thing that there is no justification for thinking about that if you're just worried about what's going to happen this year. But we don't want to build ourselves into a corner where we have some cool, elegant system and then it ultimately explodes in some terrible fire because we never let ourselves think about the future.
So would you say there is any sort of examples in the past that are very somebody trying to, a sovereign wealth fund or something, owning more than 10% of gold, something like that, some sort of asset, and it causing some problems? Do you know of any examples in history like that?
I don't, off the top of my head, know in detail. People talk about there was a time where someone cornered the silver market, I think. Which cornering a market just means buying up a huge amount of the asset so that you end up sort of dictating the market price in a way. I think that might have been a case where that person or that entity did that intentionally in order to manipulate the price and end up somehow making profit off of that. But no, it's a great query. I would love to, that's something that'd be great for one of our team members or you guys to look into. It's just can we find examples where sovereign wealth funds ended up owning too much of something, or maybe, I guess I would look at sovereign wealth funds. I'd look at endowments for universities, can be sometimes large, other just large capital managers. Have they run into that problem?
That's interesting.
I'll bet they have.
Yeah. What is it the Harvard or Yale fund? That's one of the larger ones in the U.S., right?
Yeah, I think both of them are quite large. Yale may be larger, I'm not sure, but yeah, they're both quite big.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Dashes,
Dashes, do you have any questions?
Let me see if I have any questions for you guys. What do you guys think is the current narrative about R tokens? I'm in this bubble, but I guess you're a little bit in the bubble. When you talk to people outside of the reserve ecosystem about R tokens, what do they think they are? Is anyone particularly excited about them? Who thinks they're a stupid idea? And also, I guess, along with that, why do you think more haven't been deployed yet?
I think that's a pretty good question. So I was talking to a guy last night, and so he was interested in, maybe like a 10 to 25% interest in deploying a stablecoin with this company. And I showed him Register. It's a very well-designed interface, and you could go through EUSD, and you could see the tokens that back it, the platforms that the tokens are on. You could see, governance, risk, risk factors, all sorts of different things with each associated token, ETH Plus, IUSD, C, etc. So the person looked at it and they were, actually pretty excited. Whether it would be like another R token that was deployed, and it was, how do we grow this thing? It is like an entrepreneurial problem to grow these things, and so it's like you look. I'm not like trying to be. I'm not dissing this organization or anything, but it's like Glow Dollar. They have their own stable coin that they made, and I think they would probably say that their growth is impressive. But to the USDC, USDT users, it's like Glow Dollar is like a very micro cap stablecoin, which is for some things that's going to be totally fine, but it's like, to go out there and to make an R token for your organization that brings you percents of yield that are intangible amounts for your business to benefit, to great degrees from it. That is a serious business endeavor. It's like nonprofits. In my professional life, I help nonprofits develop things to solicit donations. As one of the many things I do. But it's kind of like this. Some people will do this entire campaign, that cost thousands of dollars, right? And they're looking for donation return on investment, right? And sometimes they will get no responses. And then sometimes other organizations, they'll spend thousands of dollars too, and they'll get one response, and it'll pay for the entire thing several times over. And so it's like, and then they'll have obviously all sorts of other ones going into like a long tail, dollars, donated sort of thing. And it's, how do you build this thing over time to benefit you is probably harder than most people are thinking. Yeah.
Braden, one of my favorite stories you ever told me about the Lodge, or I think this might have been in Discord or something, where some guy came in and said, and was asking this question very sincerely, saying like, why doesn't Reserve do this, and this to promote our tokens? Why doesn't it try to do all this? And I think it might have been you, Nevin, who came in and said, those things are illegal. and that's really one of my favorite examples about like Reserve, where everyone and I'm not trying to trash other projects, but people don't quite realize how hard it is to not break the law when it comes to these rules about promoting unregistered securities and all this. And that to me is what really separates Reserve as opposed to these other projects, that this Reserve is the one that really, really tries to play by these rules.
Totally, yeah. Something that I learned pretty early on in the project, I've sort of had to become a securities law expert, at least in some very narrow way, is that, the way you talk about an asset, you could have some asset that's exactly the same as some other asset, but just the way you talk about it publicly could cause one to legitimately be a security and another to not be. And it is the case that a lot of people want us to do things that if we were to do them, that might actually change the legal classification of RSR or of R tokens. And that's part of why the team is so intentional about the way that we talk about things, is that, they're not securities as of now. And as long as we don't do the wrong things, then they won't be securities. But it's something that we have to take very seriously. And a lot of teams don't really play by those rules.
I was about to ask, can you give us an example of something that you can't say, but maybe you literally can't do that?
Well, in the abstract, the most on the nose version is just, marketing RSR as an investment opportunity. If we and to be clear here, a lot of people think like, oh, just don't say the exact hot button words, just sort of like make people read between the lines. But no, if you go out and say things with the intent to cause somebody to believe X, even if you haven't said the statement X, if you intend to cause them to believe X and then they do in fact believe X, that's what's relevant in that situation. So if we go out and attempt to cause people to speculate on RSR as an investment opportunity, that would be a problem. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of trying to get the word out about a project that you're working on without breaking these rules?
Yeah, I actually think that if everybody were based in the U.S. and had our attitude about those rules, then I don't really think it'd be too much of a problem. I think part of the challenge comes from the fact that we are in an inherently capital competitive landscape where there are a lot of projects that don't have the same outlook on that, in many cases because they're not based in the U.S. and they're not subject to the same rules, or at least they don't feel they're subject to the same rules. And there's this, I think that sometimes there's a phenomenon in crypto where if a coin or token is not going up, it's going down. Because people want to buy things that are going up in the short term. And if a coin or token is not going up in the short term for long enough, they get bored and they go buy something else that looks like it might go up.
Right.
And so then that causes something that was maybe flat to instead go down. And so we know that phenomenon exists, but we can't respond to that by trying to hype the coin, because that just doesn't make sense legally, also ethically, I would say. So I think the challenge of existing in that frothy environment with others that are attempting to, to do things in ways that maybe are breaking the rules, makes it a little bit of a challenge. Nevertheless, I want to be clear that I am confident in our approach. I'm, despite the challenges there, I think that over the course of time, if the project succeeds, there will be plenty of capital flowing in. There will be plenty of attention. Based on the merits of the decentralized protocol itself, and I think that ultimately that's a healthier way for the project to build a base of participants than the sort of short-term game that a lot of others participate in. So it takes patience, it takes resolve in how to approach it that way, but I do feel that it is the right way to go. So even though there's these challenges, I think it's going to be fine.
I agree, and I'll just add this, and just take this for what you will, because you did ask, like you said, outside of the bubble, how do, and I'll just say, in my opinion, I think if there's one thing that the reserve community may not be fully aware of, is the reason that you are not actively promoting like other stable coins is because you want to play by these rules, and I think that might be, if I could ask or suggest one thing, is maybe try to make, I know it, but I'm here doing this, but I think that might be a misconception that some people in the community have.
I appreciate you saying that. There's sort of been an internal debate at times about whether we should talk about that or emphasize that or explain that, so it's meaningful to me for you to say that. I will push harder in that direction. There's one other question I wanted to ask you guys. What was it? Can I ask you just a totally different question?
Cool.
So, as we've talked about a little bit, we're considering taking 20 billion RSR and putting it in an emissions contract that would somehow be directed by the community of RSR holders in some way to bootstrap usage of the protocol, pay for expenses in the ecosystem, etc. Two obvious places that capital would flow to would be liquidity pools, in order to build liquidity for our tokens and help them get off the ground, make them more useful, as well as you could distribute it just directly to the R tokens themselves to just juice their yields, to just make them more attractive than other opportunities on the market in order to grow their early usage. So with those two ideas in mind, there's a question of how quickly, if we were to do this, how quickly should those emissions be emitted, right? Like Compound had like a 4-year emission schedule for the comp token in a system like this. Curve has like a 100+ year emission schedule, although it is exponentially decaying. So after like 20 years, it's basically nothing compared to what it is today. And so it's, the trade-off is like if you do it faster or more heavily weighted to the first year, you get a larger amount of capital to spend early on, but then it drops off and you have less later, and vice versa. And so I'm just curious if you guys have opinions, or if you've heard others in the ecosystem talking about it. I'm also saying it in case that others in the ecosystem listen to this, get them thinking about it. We're going to have to make a decision relatively soon if we're going to do this. What is the schedule? Because the schedule should probably be hard-coded and never change. So we got to call our shot of like, okay, how is this going to work for the next 20 years or 300 years or whatever. Curious for any thoughts you guys have on that.
I mean, could you do both? Could you split it 10 and 10 and do a linear and also an exponential decay?
You could do anything because it's just a smart contract. So any combination of different curves, they would all sort of effectively combine to some curve. Yeah.
Would you okay, so if you lock it and it's like, okay, so that's we've made the decision, we can't go back from it, but would you also maybe even just go like 7.5 for a total of 15, 7.5 linear, 7.5 decaying rate, and then what if you did 5 in some sort of wait and see? Would that be anything that's possible?
That's a cool idea. I hadn't thought about that because the benefit to having at least some of it hard-coded is it makes it so that others can enter the ecosystem with the plan of directing those emissions to their own assets, and they'll know that they'll continue to be able to do that over the course of many years. They know what the schedule is in advance, and so they can predict sort of the voting value of the RSR or whatever it is that they're acquiring. So like, for instance, ABC Labs accumulated a convex and curve position because it knew that it would be able to continually over the years use that voting power to direct curve incentives to incentivize liquidity on curve pools. If that emission schedule was just like discretionary and could be pulled at any time, they might not have been willing to make that large investment into that governance token to do that. So that's one reason why having it hard-coded is valuable, is that everyone can then see that this capital will be flowing, and everyone can sort of coordinate around the anticipation of that. However, as you're pointing out, that doesn't have to be fully committed. You could 75% commit and then 25% leave it discretionary for the community to decide 3 years from now, like, oh, this is a great opportunity, let's spend it on this. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm going to bring that into the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and obviously some of these things are potentially motivated by, legality issues. And so, we are not in this moment forever, and so things may change in the future. So, having an open door or another door to choose from, is wise, because you don't, once you lock that door, it's it's like the longevity of the project. All the decisions being made in this particular time. What if something changes, right, where you wish you hadn't done that?
Totally. Yep.
So.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Nevin. We really appreciate you joining us, and just hope you have tons of fun. And thank you. I appreciate it.
All right.
So,
cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nevin. Braden, I'm so glad that you answered that last question because I'm glad I answered the first one and then you took the next one because that was so far above my pay grade of emissions contracts for the next 100 years. I'm like, oh man, this is a Braden question.
Well, I'll be totally honest. I haven't really put too much thought into the emissions. I don't know anything about curves emissions. I have not really looked into it too much. So.
It's an interesting point to bring up. We were talking about, I gave the example before Nevin came on about the people running the site company that allows people to see, and then it is this question of is this a machine that's going to have to be maintained, or is this something, or is it a tool? And in that case, it was obviously a machine. But the question of having to do, like Urbit's elevator pitches, it's a computer that will last you 100 years, a computer designed to last. And it's always interesting to think about projects where you do have to say, okay, can we expect this, and can we design this, and can we expect it to work 100 years from now?
Yeah, and what things happen over 100 years is, the gigantic long tail of things that you can't predict, things that you have no data on, and so you kind of have to the unknown unknowns, right?
When shortly before we started doing that, we were listening to a talk, and someone brought up the example of the DAO hack, where, what was it? He said 30% of it. It was some absurd amount of Ethereum was stolen, and then Ethereum famously split from Ethereum to Ethereum Classic. And he brought up the fact that if something like Coinbase or these or USDC and these different stable tokens do, if they become the default way that people interact with cryptocurrency. So, for example, you could theoretically have a stable coin that's made up of Bitcoin, made up of Ethereum, and it's collateral. If there is a split with between Ethereum, let's say that happened now, who would decide? Because when that happened, Vitalik, and he was criticized for this decision, and is still criticized to this day. He said, "No, code is not law. I am coming in, and we are undoing this hack, and we are going to give people's money back." And 90% of the ecosystem agreed to that, or I guess the percentage that wasn't that hadn't been stolen, basically, and undid it. And I personally don't see anything wrong with that. It simply means that Ethereum was not decentralized, and they should not have advertised the DAO as being decentralized, because it was clearly not. So it's interesting to imagine how stuff like stable tokens, if that's the main way that people interact with crypto, where it could become the default, the decider.
The gravity of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
People will have to follow the gravity.
Yeah,
that's. It is interesting.
One of the topics that I'm always very interested in, what we want to discuss here on the Sovereign Stack, is the reality of politics and how it affects decisions that people have to make. I made the example of Trump getting kicked off of Twitter and stuff like that, but when one of the things I've noticed just being in the cryptocurrency space is it's a very apolitical sort of community in the sense of the biggest ideology. People have their own individual beliefs, but if there's an ideology that you can ascribe to it, it's a vaguely libertarian. The government should be as removed from people's lives as possible, and as removed from business as it's possible, not to have anarchy. Mad Max basically. And what I find very interesting about this is when you have these technologies that affect people's lives in this way, you can create a scenario where the decisions of, let's say that there was one stable coin company, USDC, that, the decisions that it makes can affect people on a degree that normally only governments have. And so once you start saying, like, which, you could argue, I don't agree with that, but you could argue that that's not necessarily bad, but it does start to become this almost government-like structure. And so...
Yeah, this reminds me of like last night when we were at Regov. There's this thing about the emergency DAOs of these different systems, and it's like, what they can come in and change, is like a very hot topic where it's like you can have. Obviously, as like a staker, if you have like a certain percent of the staking pool, you can put forth proposals, do all these different things. But these emergency DAOs can have the capabilities to like veto proposals outright, to cancel them, to make sure that they don't go through, all these different things. And so it's not like I think most of these emergency DAOs are actually built in like a very sound manner, and they are not giving them infinite control over the system, and so I'm not saying that this is like a potential thing to worry about for Reserve or any sort of neighboring ecosystem, but it's just worth considering that if we don't always keep vigilance on these sorts of things, that it can kind of spiral out into a little bit less control than you thought you had. So, or not you thought you had, but a little bit less. The ecosystem can be guided by fewer people than you thought was the case.
And it's not necessarily that is a bad thing. And, I don't know if this is a hot take example. Is Musk, like, to talk about him, do you think that's... he's recently become a political figure, but people forget this already, but he used to be quite beloved, and he was just thought of as just a very cool guy. But the way that he runs companies, there's no question about who's in charge. He runs all these companies, and there are people who discover things, and it's not, famously, it's not just him building the rockets in his garage. But he is in charge, and he does make the decisions about how the company functions, and that's a very famous example.
Yeah.
And so it's not really the issue of how something runs, to whether or not one person's in control of a project or not. That's not really ever, to me, whether it's 100 people or it's one person. The main issue is if you're lying to people or not, and
or if your incentives are aligned to the success of the project, and not something for you to be able to take the tokens and run away, air quotes, take the treasury and run away. Elon can't take all the Tesla treasury and run away because it's designed so that he can't do that, and so it's like. If you look at Twitter, being run as like a DAO, and then Elon came in and acquired the DAO, and he like changed all these things and rearranged, the DAO to be, instead of like all these different, people on like a multi-sig, it's like two or maybe just one, and so he's able to execute change very quickly, and it was obviously in this case for great good. You have people like Carl Icahn, who back in maybe the 90s used to do this sort of thing where he used to go into a company, he would buy a lot of the stock, and then he would change the board, and then basically go through and like take this company that could or could not have been making a lot of money in the past, and he would raid the company in a way that he would remove all of the different super expensive parts of the company and make it very lean, or basically just try to it's like kind of like a governance attack in a way, where he would try to benefit himself, but sometimes he would also benefit the company in a great manner as well.
Yeah.
And I remember analogies of Carl Icahn, to Elon when Elon was going into Twitter and he fired. What do you know? What
it was some
is?
absurd number, man. It was like 70%. Yeah, it might have been that.
It's 70-90%. It's basically the same thing.
So. You know what the other side of that is. There's a term that's kind of almost been forgotten, and it's kind of interesting that this doesn't really get brought up. Do you know what a corporate raider is, Braden?
Yeah, that was Carl Icahn.
Yeah. But that term, literally, what you would do is that you would take all the profitable parts of the company, and then all of the other, you would spin off a different part of the company, and just like basically raid people's pensions and stuff. And this is famously, what I've always found so funny is this is what Mitt Romney did. And what I always find that interesting, that people don't know that. And when I was reading a little bit about how they ran their campaign, Obama made the decision of saying, no one understands what that is. So we're not going to try to attack Mitt Romney on this because no one actually understands how that works. And even and it's kind of funny because even we're trying to word it correctly.
He's a corporate raider, you guys.
Yeah.
He's a what?
Yeah. It's so it's like cyberpunk. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. But even as we're trying to discuss this, we're trying to phrase it properly. And it's just interesting to me that in the 90s, you saw a lot of movies where the villains of the 90s were corporate raiders, but now that's almost been entirely forgotten. I wish I had thought to bring this up, but you were talking about just going in. As I really think that in the future we're going to see much more stuff, like with the invention of stuff like Robinhood, and you have the GameStop. I was about to say what was it called? The GameStop short.
Yeah, short squeeze.
Yeah, the short squeeze. And I'll talk about that a little bit. With these new...
I still own tons of GameStop shares. I know they're going to go to the moon soon.
Really?
I have so many people telling me that it's not going to work, but I know deep down, I'm joking.
But anyways. I totally believed you, man. It was I was all excited.
Yeah.
Well, what I find fascinating about but to the point I was about to bring up, you talk about people coming in and buying stuff. There was a recent news story, and I wish I had thought to have this ready to explain. But there was a guy who recently spent $360 million purchasing. I want to say it was a clothing company. And the way that he did it, he did not, approach the board. He did not try to make an opening offer. He literally just bought enough stock on Robinhood. He just kept on pressing the buy button. Did not try to make a deal in order to save money. He literally just bought and bought and bought, and then sent a letter to the company saying, "I am your new owner." And this was really shocking to a lot of people because, maybe you should have sent a letter saying, or been polite about it. But he was just like, no, I own this now. And
let that sink in.
Yeah. And what I really see in the future is these institutions, and so this was described as quite scandalous, and the actual reason he did it like this is he came to the conclusion that these institutions, that these law firms and whatnot, and the idea is it's better to try to negotiate, and you'll pay these people some money, but they'll save you, in the price. He had done some research and just I don't think I need any of these people or any of these institutions, and I have a Robinhood app, and I can just buy the company like this. And that's really, and so the GameStop stock exchange, the GameStop short squeeze was very much this it was populist in a very real way. It did get co-opted by people like Chamath Hapatias, or however you pronounce his last name. Nothing against the guy, but he did really kind of really start promoting that movement. And it was to his own benefit, clearly, you know, and no shame on that. But it is what I found so interesting about the GameStop short squeeze is people were billing this as if it was this huge innovation or this thing that had never happened before about people going on this website Reddit and saying and like coordinating amongst themselves, and they said like, oh, if we just buy all this stock at the same time, we can destroy these short sellers and we can make the price go up. And this was billed as like something that had never happened before, but it's simply not true. This happens all the time. And in fact, during the great financial crisis of 2009, it was discovered that people were going into Bloomberg terminals. And if for those of you who have never seen a Bloomberg terminal or know what it is, it's a bespoke computer that for stock traders. And Michael Bloomberg famously created these. And there are message boards that only people with Bloomberg terminals can access, and I think it costs like $36,000 a year, not just for but like in order to access these. But it's worth it for professional stock traders. And so there were stock traders that were creating rooms in these Bloomberg terminal groups, literally called I want to say like Viking Raiders, where they would coordinate these very illegal actions. And the article that I remember reading about this was, does the NSA have access to a Bloomberg terminal? Because if you had access to a Bloomberg terminal, you could just join these public forums. I mean public, they're private, and you need a Bloomberg terminal.
So the NSA could not access the token gated chat.
I mean, yeah. Like it's really that. It was so shocking because this was being done in broad daylight, and there was, to the best of my knowledge, there's never been any like investigation into this, and it was this. So when people were billing the short squeeze as this big innovative technology of saying like, you see, you don't need these institutions to do this anymore. Now anyone can be a Wall Street trader. What they were really, in a lot of ways, I think that they really did the GameStop. What were they called? The apes.
Yes.
The apes. They did them wrong, and this is an excellent example of the difference between sovereign technology and unsovereign. Is the way that ended is that they took the buy button away. And that, to me, was the single biggest scam.
You hear that, Reddit? If you don't own the software that you're using to buy your stocks, they can just uninstall the buy button on it. And but you need to own and manage your own software, and that's kind of what Urbit does. If you want to take a look at it,
the fact that was not the biggest takeaway from that whole thing. I didn't participate in it, but when I heard that they had taken away, I got angry. It was like that's so unfair. Like, you're just going to step in. They also shut down the GameStop Ape Discord server, where they were literally, and it was literally because one of the investors of these companies that were shorting it, they own stock in Discord, and like they were one of the major investors, and they just called them up and said like, shut this down, and they did. And if you don't own the software, so when people talk about these like populist,
same thing with Discord, your stock software and Discord, your means of communicating. If you are not with Urbit, you can run your own server, your own communications device, and nobody, short of stopping, turning off your internet, you are continually able to engage, peer-to-peer with people. You can run the software; they can't take it away from you. You can even download the software that other people are running from other people instead of a centralized service like Discord. You don't have to go to Discord's authorization server, to be able to use the software. Well, I mean, an authorization server could be built into Urbit software, of course, but it is completely something that you can be aware of when you're using the software.
Even the language that Discord uses, a Discord server, it's not a server. It's not in any way a server.
It's just an interface to their server.
Yeah, and like it's this illusion of control. Like, oh, this is my Discord server. Like that's like, I don't know. It's like, this is my thing that I call my thing, but it's clearly not.
I remember our Notion. So we had a Notion account to organize our podcast at one point, and just one day I logged in and it was gone. And I tried to email Notion about it, and they were like, "What are you talking about? You never had anything." And it was like, interesting. And Notion's great. Don't get me wrong. I've heard nothing but positive praise from people about Notion since this incident. But it kind of really made me realize that not having the control over the things can be a little bit unsavory. So
okay. Sorry.
Yes.
We should literally just turn this podcast into us complaining about technology, because I have another example. Have you ever seen my Remarkable, Braden? I can't remember if I've ever shown you it.
Remarkable?
Do you know what that is?
No.
I wish I had brought it with me, but a Remarkable tablet is it's an e-ink device.
Oh, and yeah, I have seen those.
Yeah. I have one. And when I got it, it's beautiful. It's the thinnest device on the market. The screen is designed to simulate the feel of paper. And I would love to see Urbit running on one of these. And so just to touch it, it kind of feels like touching paper. And it's designed to, like, this is how like the closest thing to reading a book on a screen is. And it's wonderful. So it's not cheap. I want to say when I bought it, it was about $500. Or excuse me, someone bought it for me. It was a gift. But it was about $500. But if you can spring for it, it's a luxury item, but it's absolutely worth it. About I want to say 6 months after I got it, I got an email saying, so how it works when I bought it at first, or when I was given it, all the functions on it of the different like notes and stuff, one of the features of, you can write and it will just put it into text what you write on it, and it can also read cursive. I got and that was what it was like when I bought it. I got an email saying that the service that it was being provided was going to change. That now, so it said, you bought it before this happened, so you have been grandfathered in, and nothing. You're going to get this forever. Nothing will change. Everybody else who buys a Remarkable now, you have to pay a subscription fee in order to maintain. So literally, they have degraded the product. And Remarkable, I hope you hear this, because I really think this is wrong to do. I understand that you're a company and you're in need to make money, but I really think this is a really disgusting thing to do. And so they have reached out, and it's not software that is, it's not that just that they're changing the software that's being installed. It's all. So, for example, if I were to give my Remarkable to you, Braden, and you were to switch from my Remarkable account to create your own, you would no longer get this service. You would have to pay for it. It's not just that this device is, an exception, and that's absurd. Like it really is. Like, I don't understand how. For one thing, I don't think this should be legal. But it really does strike me as just something that we really, as a society, shouldn't tolerate, like the purpose degradation of products like this. And you can make an argument that, maybe that they couldn't continue and they'd go out of business if they didn't, change their business model. And you can make this argument. My personal opinion is, if the choice between reaching out and changing the deal that you made with your customers, and if you don't do that, then you go out of business. Then you should go out of business because you should purchase. This is like the right to own things. And people, I still to this day don't know if planned obsolescence is it real, Braden? Planned obsolescence?
Yeah, it's real.
You think it's real?
Of course, it's real. You're hearing it here, guys. Planned obsolescence, it's real. But
any companies you would like to call out so they can sue us?
Singer, who made the sewing machines.
Is this real?
Yeah, this is like a, and I'm not using the term loosely textbook example, but actually a textbook example in school is like, you learn about like planned obsolescence. In the Singer sewing machines are used as the textbook example of, every couple years they would change their machines just a tiny bit. They initially released the machine as like a, it was like, oh, it was really cool, but there are all these features that they held back. That they would release, onesie-twosies over time to force people to continually buy more of these machines over time and to sustain their business model. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, he was just holding it up and he said Apple USB plugs. I was like, yes, it is. Yeah. I think there was actually a Supreme Court ruling saying like they originally Apple wanted to have a different one for every single laptop, and I said Supreme Court, but I think there was a ruling that said like no, you can't do that. That's an example of like.
It's like we are just trying to separate out the logic part of the things
Keep going.
the assets. So the idea is that for
1 second.
chains, like it's basically like rules of DeFi. They have to exist on each of these different chains. So for that, you need to.
But like we see. I'll give a quick example. If anyone's ever seen the Cyberpunk Edge Runners Netflix anime that came out, and it was widely regarded as being phenomenal. There was one moment. I'm not sure if this is a real joke in it, but it's set in this like Cyberpunk 2077 dystopia, and there's a moment in it where the main character, who's this teenager, he's washing his clothes in his house, and his washing machine it stops as he's waiting because he's about to go to school, and he's washing his uniform, and the washing machine stops and it says, "You are out of credits. Please deposit." And he was like, "Mom, we're out of credits." And then he has to go to school in like his street clothes because his uniform, and he
gets beat up.
Yeah. That is exactly what happens. And what I found, so I didn't know if that was like purposely. What I found funny about that is that's not cyberpunk or dystopian. That's literally like, I mean, it is dystopian, but that's literally like there are currently laundry machines where there's a current service models where they will come in and they will install a laundry machine at your house. And it won't cost you anything. They'll just put it in there, but you will have to pay the service fee, and it's not yours. You can't take it with you if you move or anything. And it is this concept of
social credit system that's happening in China, and the EU was kind of public a few years ago with this claim: you won't have to own anything. We will provide everything to you with the digital euro that's coming up, etc. It's in their mindset. Yes.
Yeah, one of my favorite authors, David Wong, wrote this long piece. Jason Parkin is his real name. Wrote this long piece about the nature between convenience and power, and it's very shocking when you suddenly discover like, oh, you don't have any power. Like you may think like, oh, I have an Uber. Why do I need a car? I have an Uber account and I can just call a car. But the moment that you realize like, oh, I'm actually like literally powerless is when you need to go somewhere and all of a sudden you can't get there.
So one thing I will say is that I know that I am like a gigantic Tesla shill, and everybody knows that about me more or less. But one thing that is completely possible is, obviously Elon came in and made it so that you could have a Twitter subscription. What if you've bought your Tesla and all of a sudden to get all these extra features like autopilot or whatever, even if you've paid for them in the past, what if the only way to do that is with autopilot, and then, with a subscription to autopilot? Like you have to pay in order for you to get driven. And let's just imagine, 50 years in the future. Okay, 50 years in the future, you are part of a society that no longer learns how to drive. The cars just drive themselves. So if you don't know how to drive, the cars don't have steering wheels. What happens when you want to go somewhere and there's a system update and it says, well, now you have to pay a subscription, even though you own these cars or whatever. It's like a very dystopian sort of thing. But, when you are able to, own... you are able to control the software that runs on the device. Okay, when you are able to do that, you can decline. It's just like the right to repair. It's like, should I be able to repair this myself, or should I be able to, only allow Apple to repair these things, or it becomes a paperweight, right? So is there going to be a right to deny software upgrades, those sort of things? What sort of things have to happen to point society in the direction and legislation in the direction of, making that a law, to protect people. And so, or maybe you can even just try to, you'd be like Gmail, Gmail going away, maybe this isn't a good direction to go with this, but maybe your thoughts on the right to deny software upgrades, as it were.
Do you know? And please don't jump across the table, I guess this is, and tag me when I say this, but Sam Hyde actually brought up a very interesting point where he predicted in one of his live streams that he thinks that the way that society, in 50 years, maybe not even that long, maybe in 20 years, the way that everything goes with how software works and the idea of of software as a service, the idea of going in, he thinks that in 20 years, the idea of going into a computer and bringing up a terminal on your computer, on a program, he thinks that will be socially, not necessarily legally, but socially that would be, unless you're a programmer and you're that's what you do for a living. But the idea of going into a computer and messing around with your computer, that will be a very socially suspicious thing to do. Why are you messing around? What are you doing in there? What are you up to?
It's like in Brave New World when you're alone. It's like, why do you need to be alone?
Yeah, exactly.
What are you thinking about?
And I think I really hope that's not the case, but and that's why I'm so interested in stuff like Urbit, where Urbit is billed as this is a digital computer that you own, and to maintain it, to be able to go in there and work on it and understand it in the same way that you can go and you can fix your car. It's not absolutely necessary for you to understand how your car works and be able to fix it to drive it, but you can. If you look up a YouTube video, you can learn how to fix your car, and to create a computer that is that functions like that. But I do think that is the very scary alternative future that I want to try to avoid.
So here's just one thing that I've done myself, just as an experiment, because it's not that expensive, but it is capitally maybe inefficient. But I went out and bought a purpose-built computer meant for hosting Urbit planets. It's called a native planet device. So if you go to nativeplanet.io, you can see their different devices that they sell. So they have the Aurora, that's their flagship. the Tellurian, and so I got Tellurian 2.0. Great machine. I think that's good, but I think I just saw that they're shipping the first of the Callistos, and so they're like sub $300 personal, server. Purpose-built computers, and so you can have in your own home, you can host software on this device, run it, and have it be more or less. It runs on top of the current internet, and you can basically, at least be able to message, video, voice calls, these different primitives. Signal is great, but your code runs on their servers. Telegram is great, but your code runs on their servers. They can do whatever they want with your data. I think Signal is great, but there are some there's some FUD out there that how do you know what is running on the the Signal servers is actually the code that they say they are running. It's like sometimes you can't. You can't know these things for certain unless you go in and inspect it. And so, Urbit is a lot of code, and if you were able to understand it, you could feasibly, understand the code, run your own hardware and software, all in conjunction, and really know what is going on. I think some of these things, you kind of have a responsibility to yourself to do, and computers. This is like the complete opposite of what everybody else does. It's like going out and growing your own vegetables. Not going to McDonald's. You're making your own food, and it's.
I don't appreciate being called out like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's okay to go to McDonald's and get your own food every once in a while,
right.
But at the same time, it's you should be able to know how to feed yourself.
Yes,
you should be able to know how to make breakfast, those sorts of things, and so. Maybe it's knowing how to sew your own clothing, these quintessential life skills that everybody should have. I think that actually pretty much applies super directly to computers, and that you are more or less, abdicating your responsibility to understand these systems if you don't go out and try to do these things. It's just I hate to use Elon again, but before, a couple of nights ago, he was, oh my God, I bought a new computer, Microsoft 11, or Windows 11.
Oh yeah. What was that about?
11. Windows 11. I have to be connected to the internet, and I have to make a Microsoft account. I mean, even though with an Urbit, with Urbit, you have to have an Urbit planet, but it's not like you have to register with the Urbit Foundation,
yeah.
All these different things about yourself.
There's no one on Urbit that can kick you off of Urbit.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
There, people will stop. Upset. People will just set it so where they don't see your messages anymore. And if you piss off enough people, you'll just get, probably put on a blacklist with only people on other blacklists can talk to you. Or because people, but it's not that you'll be kicked off of Urbit and can't use it. People will just be ignoring you.
You can also look into so Urbit is kind of like a virtual machine, and so you could go and see the code that's actually executing on your planet, and you can understand that code that is executing if you just put enough energy into understanding these things.
Yeah,
and it's pretty interesting.
The first time I ever did a video call over Urbit. And it worked. And I just sat there and I just thought it was incredible because there are so many companies and so many employees and so much capital and stock being put into stuff like Skype and Zoom and stuff like that. And all of these machines that are necessary to make that happen, to make a video call on a computer. And I call Skype, say, please connect me with this person, and they do it. And once you can remove that middleman and create something.
Well, Skype was actually peer-to-peer. This is actually, and shout out to Jan Tallinn, by the way, cool guy. So he was the one of the creators of Skype. He also created Kazaa, and he's also an investor in Reserve. But with that being said, Skype, yeah, so it was basically like notes, and then also it was like peer-to-peer RAN. So I remember this when I was using it at certain points. So there are kind of like super nodes, that people would run, and you could run for Skype, but you would actually, for Skype, the service, you would relay data to other users about who was online, all of these different things, and then you would like connect to the other people. But I remember talking to my friends over the phone and being like, hey, are you going to get on Skype tonight? I thought we were going to chat. I'm looking on there and they're shown as offline. And, they were actually online the entire time, but the nodes that were connecting us were not like getting all the way through. And so I think I remember I would just like type ASD or something, send it through, and then they would show up as online all of a sudden. Like I had forced that connection to their Skype client, and it would allow me to see that they were online and make calls and stuff. But I'm sure if I had made a call, it would go through, but I was waiting for them to go online, right? So anyways, Skype was really cool, and Kazaa, another great peer-to-peer system.
One of the things that I find very interesting, and some of my favorite speculative fiction with writers like Neil Stephenson, for example, one of the things that he talks about in a book called The Diamond Age, which is the sequel to Snow Crash, probably his most famous work. And this book, Braden and I probably bring up to each other like once a week when we talk about it. But he theorized the creation in this book, The Diamond Age, of these decentralized countries that can own land. It doesn't really matter where they own land. And it's these ideas of what will come after nation states. And you can if you do a lot of digging and you do a lot of research into blockchain lore, for want of a better word, but into like the belief and the philosophy of stuff like blockchain and of cryptography and the political ideas that some of these people had who created it, the idea of creating these kinds of communities of countries that could even rise to the standard to even possibly replace nation states as the default form of government. And famously, Neil Stephenson described these as files. They are decentralized governments that basically they can own land, and their laws are enforced on whatever land they happen to be on, no matter what. But also, when you, as a member of this file, you ascribe to certain beliefs. And or certain behavior, and you agree to obey certain rules. And if you say go to another person's country or file, and you break the law there, that your file's law there, you are held to that standard even if you are somewhere else. And in Balaji Srinivasan, I think is how you pronounce his name. This is his work, The Network State, is an expansion of this concept of files and of trying to say like this is where this is going, and the actual political structure and the technologies that would be involved in creating something like this, technologies like Urbit, technologies like blockchain, and stuff like that. I really feel like we're that philosophically that we are already there. That I really feel people have commented about the nature of like the fracturing of media environments, and there will never be another like Walter Cronkite. And it says something that like all Walter Cronkite is Joe Rogan. Nothing against Joe Rogan, but it is interesting that this figure has but everyone is so siloed in their media spheres that the idea of us saying like we are one people and one nation is kind of looked at as almost naive and so I really do think so. The reason I bring this up and I give this example is one of the things that doesn't really get discussed is, okay, so this is going to happen, this is the direction we're going, putting aside whether or not we want that to happen, the pros and cons of it, what would be required? in order for something like that to exist. And for a decentralized nation state to exist, you would, in order to keep the information, if you are existing as an abstraction outside of borders, and what defines you as a member of this nation is purely digital. It would be something on chain, something like that. You would need to have records and records that are sovereign, meaning like that they cannot be destroyed, they cannot be tampered with, and they cannot be hacked. And that would require these new technologies like blockchain and something like Urbit. And to give one quick example, one of the biggest news stories of the last 20 years was the SolarWinds hack of the federal government. And if you have not heard of this story, I urge everyone listening to this to Google what that is, because it is, to this day, it is shocking to me that this was not a bigger deal. So for those of you who don't know, SolarWinds was a hack where the general consensus is that it was the Russian government hacked into a security company called SolarWinds, and they were able to gain access to the security company that did work for the federal government. So once it managed to get into the security company, they were able to get into the access the rest of almost every single computer in the federal government. And it is considered to be the largest data breach in U.S. history. And this happened at the very tail end of 2019. I want to say it was 2019 or it was the beginning of 2020, one or the other. And this is huge. There should have been mass resignations. There should have been mass firings. There should have been people arrested over this, and nothing happened. And I'm not even sure if they changed the computers that were hacked. But this is the kind of thing that needs to be able to be impossible. And the fact that it was possible right now at all is a massive scandal.
Yes. So I am, there are a lot of people that are telling us to end the podcast now. With that, no, I'm joking. This is just a coincidence. So it was not because of the talking about the solar. Trying to end the podcast.
A Russian man is approaching us. He looks upset.
There are men in suits surrounding us. We have to go. So our time is nearing an end. And so I would recommend people go read Snow Crash and the Diamond Age. I really liked the Diamond Age. It was great. You guys can go check out Urbit too. It's just like urbit.org. Native Planet is great too. But with all those things being said, we're going to wrap it up here. This gives you a good ability to take a break before the next host come on in about half an hour here, 24 minutes. So up next will be David from the Ashna Protocol, and we're going to be signing off from here. So this is Braden from the Sovereign Stack, and also my co-host Dashus. And I appreciate you guys so much for listening, and just hope you have a nice time. So thank you.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you so much.
Market, right? And so I'm going to give you an example of something that we just launched recently, which is a partnership with